Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this episode is very, very important because many startup companies from around Asia Pacific, from South Asia, from Malaysia and other countries, they are interested to know more about how they can develop a good startup, as well as how they can bring more investment in their startup and other things. There are many companies from cybersecurity, from autonomous vehicles, AI related companies, different kind of venture capital, even from Asia Pacific. They request that how our speakers they give their intellectual feedback on these startups and investment. This is very important. So we will discuss about these things, and we have our famous speaker, Professor Rob. Always he come up with a very interesting insight from the industry, as well as we have our Professor Edward. He is a very famous academician, scholars, and he running many interesting things with his think tank. So let's start and on this topic, investment and startup. I want to start from Professor Rob. How do you want to analyze today's topic, especially startup investment, how we can develop better ecosystem?
Well, what's often needed in a startup are four things. You need somebody that's a visionary, that has the idea about the product offering, has some understanding of how it gets to market. In other words, what the sales channel is. Do you sell to IT organizations or consumers, and how do you get to them? And then you need somebody that understands operations. How do you build a company? Because if you don't know how to put it together, it's probably not going to work. You need somebody that understands finance, how to handle the money. Most of the startups that I've worked with that have ended really badly have ended really badly because of the lack of financial experience and an inability to control their spending. And then as you get closer to market, you're going to need marketing and sales. There's a pretty good argument to have marketing involved a little earlier in the process, so somebody is thinking about how are you going to get people excited about this thing. And it doesn't hurt to have sales in early as well, but that can be kind of expensive because typically good salespeople are commissioned, and you've got to bridge them until you have a product to sell. So some folks choose to leave that a little bit later in life. And it does depend on volume. Is it a really expensive thing that you only have to sell a few of, or is it a very inexpensive thing so you have to sell a lot of them in order to make it work? And your ops guy is the guy that's going to know about how to manufacture and build this thing and service and support it. And these days you can actually hire a lot of that stuff out, but you have to have that breadth of skills, so you know how to design it, build it, get people excited about it, sell it, and then deliver it to them, and then support it afterwards. And so the end result is you need a breadth of skills. And then when you go out to pitch the idea, you at least need a core. If you just have the idea, investors probably aren't going to get too excited. If you've got the idea, prototype, perhaps a bit more excited. And you have a variety of ways to get funding these days, including crowdfunding, angel investors and VCs. So your funding sources are relatively broad, but the more cooked the offering is, and the more examples you have of success, the more excited investors are. They'll tend to take a much larger ownership position the earlier you are in that process. When you can show activity, you can push back a little bit and have a better chance of retaining control as the company grows. But these are all things you decide. Another thing to decide fairly early on is whether you're going to carry on and build this thing out, or if you're going to sell it to somebody else. For me, if somebody's just going to build it and sell it to somebody else, I'm not really convinced they have the will to make it successful. And will is so important here, because you're going to be working long hours at the front end, putting in all kinds of time, and likely wasting a lot of it as you refine your processes and stuff. And if you don't have the passion for the offering, you probably won't survive that particular level. But that's in a nutshell. That's what we look for when we're looking for a company that's asking for money. Do they have the skill set? Do they have the customers? And is there any reasonable chance that things going to be profitable and a success?
Excellent, Professor Rob. Professor Edward, how do you want to analyze this startup and how we can develop startup ecosystem? Because from developing nations, we are observing, especially government invest a lot of money for
Mm-hmm.
startup. Even in the
Mm-hmm.
COVID-19 situation, government invest a lot because they have to solve the unemployment problem. But my question is that previously we are observing many of the investment it's not working properly. And
Mm-hmm.
second things, how we can develop a better ecosystem to solve this unemployment problem in Asia Pacific. What your observation?
Well, these are very good questions. I want to start off by with an example that has occurred this morning in the United States, and that is Elon Musk, his company SpaceX, has just launched astronauts to the International Space Station, which is very exciting for me because I've been involved in space policy for many decades, and Elon Musk is an interesting example of somebody who was an entrepreneur who started off by founding with a man named Peter Thiel a very small company called PayPal. And what they were looking at was the growth of internet commerce, and they were saying, what's missing in internet commerce? And what they saw missing was a secure way to basically have people who do not know each other and might be on the other side of the country or even the other side of the world to exchange money without worrying about whether it's going to go into your bank account, whether it's going to be secure, whether it's going to be stolen or whatever. And so Musk and Thiel founded this company, PayPal, and I think many of your listeners know what happened. It became one of the top companies, spurring the e-commerce revolution. Elon Musk became terribly rich, as did Peter Thiel, and they took that money, Elon did anyway, to found SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, and a whole bunch of other companies. And it's a marvelous success story. Granted, he got some government contracts, and in fact, this is even interesting as well. For many years, people like myself have been saying government space policy is very backward looking, very sclerotic. It's it's not terribly efficient, and what we need is private companies coming in and providing services to the government rather than having the government build their own rockets. That's exactly what has happened today. Elon Musk is now a private company flying astronauts to the space station, and he now has the contract to fly human beings back to the moon. I bring this up just to say that there's a reality about companies and how you can start very small, like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, or for that matter, Jeff Bezos, who founded Amazon, of course. But I'll add a few points to build on what Rob has said. By the way, if I were a genius about this, I would be rich as Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, but I'm not. So take my advice appropriately. But I do know something about public policy. A couple of important issues about investing, and then a couple of important issues about unemployment, the issue that you have brought up. If you're a startup, you really have to ask these questions about, what is the unique value that you are providing to the customers? Is it a service? Is it an invention that you think you can build up, like Apple Computer did in the early days? This is very important. I want to recommend a book to your listeners by, in fact, Peter Thiel, 021. And in this book, Peter Thiel, who again is one of the most successful entrepreneur investors in the United States and I guess in the world, goes over this book and looks at a lot of the errors of investors, especially early investors. An example, he talks about how at a certain point, a decade or so ago in the United States and maybe elsewhere, lots of investors or startups said, hey, we can get in on the green revolution. We can provide green technology and it's going to be wonderful and we're going to make a lot of money and we're going to help the environment. Isn't that great? But he goes over in the book about why a lot of those early startups trying to get into the green economy failed. And for example, they didn't appreciate that there's a lot of competitors out there. Everybody is competing for the same dollar. So unless you have something really unique, there's a good chance that, you're not going to get that share of the market. Some people would say, look, there's a multi-billion-dollar market. If we can just get this much of it, we're going to make lots of money. And most of them did not. Most of them failed. Thiel talks about how if you really are an entrepreneurial investor and with a startup, and you're looking at a market like that, he argues for the so-called 10 times rule, that you really should look at something that a good or service that you can offer 10 times the value that your competitors are offering. And again, I call this book to your attention. In terms of your other question about unemployment, government is never, ever, ever the best way to solve an unemployment problem. I want to make a very important point to your audience, because I find that this fallacy, you find it in the United States today, you find it in Europe, you found it for decades, and that is that somehow unemployment is a problem because either technology is taking our jobs, robots are going to take our jobs in factories and so forth. There's always something for people, human beings to do. There's always some kind of work that human beings can do. And so the question is, is that work providing value to paying customers? And if it's private entrepreneurs or investors in startups in the market, what they're looking for is the customers. They're looking for the value that they can provide. And that's crucial, because you're never going to solve unemployment by simply putting people on government payrolls, because all that does is take capital that could be used by those startups, and it takes it into the form of taxes, or if you print money, it's inflation, of course, and you give that money to vested interests that use political clout to keep their jobs, as opposed to keeping their jobs because we have to provide some kind of value to customers. Otherwise, we're not going to succeed. So I think that's where the discussion should start. If you want to solve an unemployment problem, well, if you have an unemployment problem, apart from natural disasters like the COVID virus, you have to look at how to create, as you say, the environment to allow private entrepreneurs and startups to experiment, to try this, to try that, and so forth. That is the only way you're going to create value. And the more value you create, the more there are going to be opportunities for people to trade their labor for more stuff, which we call goods and services. So that's the way to think about it.
Thank you. Professor Rob, when we're discussing about startup ecosystem, can you clear this jargon? What is the best practices for developing this ecosystem? How we can develop this ecosystem? What we need actually to develop this ecosystem? What area we can focus, even from your Silicon Valley experience and big corporation experience, how it works, how you want to share with our audience?
Well, so from time to time, I get involved with the different investment groups out of the various large companies. I don't do much work with VCs directly anymore. They tend to be really cheap. What you need to have on the team are people that are have expertise in the areas that you're planning on funding, and have a clear idea of what areas you're funding. And then part of the funding effort for the successful efforts is to provide resources for the startups that fill the gap they have in their skills, to help them find partners to manufacture, help them find partners and distributors to sell, and kind of help them set up their HR shop as well. That can be one of the biggest problems in a startup, is little things can kind of blow out of control. You can have misogyny, and you can have sexual harassment, and you can have a whole bunch of stuff that you just want to make sure are handled at the front end. And then of course you want to also have some financial people in the effort that can help them get funding, help them learn how to manage their funds and resources. In effect, the funding effort or the bootstrapping effort should have as a breadth of skills, the very skills that you need to do the startups that you're funding, but in people that are kind of expert at this and are used to providing advice and consultation. Sometimes these things break apart. These efforts break apart because the the people providing the advice forget they're providing the advice and think they're running the company, and that can be problematic. So because you got to let the people that are starting the company run it. Also, you need to be really aware of the motives behind the people asking for the money. If they're passionate about the product, if they're passionate about the offering, that's good. If what they're really thinking about is, I want to have those really great cars and mansions, and I'm doing this for the money, they won't have the drive to get it done, because you don't get rich overnight. Well, some people have, but the odds against it are very high. For instance, I wouldn't use Elon Musk as an example because we only got one of them. And he's crazy. There's also kind of a rule with regard to companies is leadership should change as it phases. So you have startup leadership, transition leadership, sustaining leadership. And while we certainly see Musk do that transition between all three, that's kind of why he looks crazy now, because in most of his companies, they're at the sustaining mode, and he's still startup crazy. So he's actually doing, at the time, he's doing as much damage as he's doing good now. But and I'm still kind of amazed he's not in jail. But that's kind of the way it is. And the thing is you also have to coach that executive staff in what it is they enjoy. Often the startup manager really likes doing stuff. They like rolling up their sleeves. They like working. They're a startup manager because they like being independent. They don't have a lot of rules. But when you get into the sustaining form of the company, now you've got to adhere to regulations. You've got to be concerned about things that, like HR and stuff, you probably didn't have to worry a hell of a lot about before. And you've got to worry about liability and litigation. And so if the sustaining manager is more of a caretaker on one side, but still maintains the vision forward, while the startup manager is hell bent for leather, let's just get it done and have fun doing it. It's rare that a startup executive really enjoys a sustaining company, and vice versa. And you've got to be just aware of that. Now, as I said, Edward pointed out Elon Musk that made the transition between the phases. Thomas Watson Sr. clearly did in building IBM, but it's just very rare. If you look at how Microsoft came to market, they transitioned to professional leadership fairly early on, and then Bill Gates came back in a sustaining mode and carried it forward. But if you saw it, he really didn't enjoy that part, and then he retired and went off and did his own thing and brought in Steve Ballmer, who would have been a good sustaining manager, but the issue is he didn't understand the technology, and that lack of programming skill set resulted in a failure, even though the company was economically doing very well. But it had lost its vision. We got the same issue with Tim Cook at Apple. Yep, most valuable company in the world. Nope, he's the rock running the company. But he is a sustaining manager. He just lacks the vision to carry the company forward, which is why they're playing some rather horrible games with customer management. I figure that company is going to go down just about the time he decides to retire, and I'm going to stand back and watch. But in any case, that's kind of it. That's how you just have to make sure you have the right skills, people that are experienced, people that know how to provide the advice and not take over, and kind of create a symbiotic relationship between the companies they're funding and the organization funding them.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Professor Edwards, one thing always we hear that startup basically come up with the solution of a problem. Any specific problem we have, they are providing solution. But when we work with a startup and different kind of startup, actually one startup following another startup, one startup following another startup. So my question is that how a startup company become a real solution provider, and how they can find out the problem and they can give a real solution for their ecosystem?
Interesting question. To that, again, if I really knew the answer, I would be rich as some of the individuals that we have just discussed. But sort of looking at it, from more of an academic perspective, again, Rob is quite correct that what you need in a startup, first of all, is at the beginning, are the individuals who really have a vision, who are passionate about the issue, as opposed to, and this is something that Peter Thiel does discuss in his book, people who go in and say, or companies that try to attract people because they say, we've got lots of benefits for you. We're going to provide free coffee and beer and this and that and the other. And if that's why someone is coming into the company, it's probably not going to work. And we see that in many cases here in the United States. But the question you ask is, there's actually two answers to the question you ask about providing solutions. First of all, is to look at where there is a possible problem where the company can provide a solution. That's what an entrepreneur does. An entrepreneur looks for something in the economy and says, you know what? In the case of Musk and Thiel, e-commerce is slow because there's no way to pay people and make sure your payments are secure and they go into the bank and so forth. So that was the market they tried to do. There's also the idea that some people don't even know that they need a product, and that was, of course, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak's vision. Who would need a computer? What normal person would need a computer? Big companies need computers, big research labs need computers, governments need computers, big mainframe computers. No one is at home is going to need a small laptop computer or desktop computer. And what they did was they said, you know what? We see a possible product we can produce that some people don't even know that they need, but we can show them the value of having the product. And of course, in the case of Apple Computer, Steve Wozniak produced the Apple II, which was their first big successful computer, and they started to put out apps. That is, accounting, for example, accounting software that provided value. And so again, they looked for a problem that needed a solution, and they provided that a solution. So that is a lot of what an entrepreneur is doing, is to say, is there a problem out there that I can solve with my service? One of the examples right now, for example, is software as a service. And for bigger companies, of course, a lot of them pay a lot of money for very sophisticated software. Is that necessary? Or can you just do software as a service? In the same way that if I want to ship something across the country, I don't have to buy my own trucks. I can simply, if I'm a small business, I simply go to Federal Express or to some other private company. And so entrepreneurs thinking about software as a service is an example of what's happening right now. I want to mention two other very quick points here. Rob correctly talked about the different roles and the different transitions that a company will go through as they go from being a startup to a bigger company. That happened with Intel. Intel, of course, the computer chip company, and it was started by Gordon Moore and Noyce, and they were kind of techie guys, but they knew that they had to have someone who could come in and really run the company on the ground. And so they hired a gentleman named Andy Groves, who was a Hungarian who managed to escape both the Nazis and the communists. So this was a guy who was, he was hardcore. He wasn't some nice, we want to be nice to everybody. He was he wasn't an angry person or anything, but he insisted on accuracy. He insisted on, we've got to run the company in a certain way. And so the fact that they had that team of Gordon Moore, Noyce, and Groves that allowed Intel to grow. The final thing I'll mention, because you mentioned about the ecosystem, and that's very important as well. And I want to come back to something I've mentioned on these broadcasts in the past, and that is you have to look at the you might call the political infrastructure, the economic infrastructure. The companies or the countries that tend to be the most entrepreneurial friendly on the index of economic freedom are the ones that, first of all, have high scores on the rule of law. That is protection of property rights, judicial effectiveness, government integrity. That's very important, because if you're a small startup, you want to make sure that your property rights are going to be protected, that contracts are going to be protected, that you're not going to have to simply spend much of your time bribing government officials to get permission to do whatever it is you want. You also need a certain amount of market flexibility or freedom, I should say. That is investment freedom. You have to have a system in which, for example, the currency is not going to be inflated. An example I always give is Argentina, which a century ago is one of the richest countries in the world. And you would think that entrepreneurs would be flourishing in a country like that. but their policies were simply, and they had good infrastructure. The British had built infrastructure there, but they didn't have the right system. So you didn't get a lot of Argentine entrepreneurs. And today the country still struggles with these problems. So I would say if you're an entrepreneur in Malaysia, in any of the Asian Pacific countries, you really have to pay attention to your governing system to make sure that it's friendly to you, and to the extent that you can have some sort of input to the government, you can tell them, the government officials, folks, it's going to be to everybody's benefit if we protect property rights. Malaysia, by the way, is very good on protecting property rights. So that's one of the reasons why they're a dynamic economy. They're very good on judicial effectiveness, not so good on government integrity, but it's going up. And so you have to look at these things, because if you're a startup especially, these kinds of issues are going to make a great deal of difference.
Thank you. Excellent. Professor Rob, like at present, there are many questions, especially from the different kind of startup, because they are facing financial trouble, as well as they are moving with different kind of challenging situation right now. What is your advice for this kind of startup, how they can survive? What is the dynamic strategy they can take, or how they can move with the global business from Asia Pacific? Is there any guidelines or anything in your hand?
Well, partner. When you're talking about moving out of your geography initially to other geographies, you generally have to partner with somebody that exists in those geographies that knows how to sell in them. The rules and regulations that define what it is you're going to do in that geography, you're not going to know, and it wouldn't be wise for you to spend a ton of time learning them until you get larger, and then it's institutional learning. You don't necessarily need to know it yourself as if you're running the firm. But you do have to make sure there are people that do understand that in the company as it gets larger. I think what's the term is trust but verify. When you set up partnerships, you do want to make sure that you have people on staff that eventually understand what's going on. I remember a lot of stories about Apple selling into South America and particularly into Africa, where their distributors were just robbing them blind, and they were completely unaware of it. And so but it's partnering. You really can't do a lot of that stuff yourself. Fortunately, these days we've got a lot of services out there that can do that. When I was starting up myself years ago, a lot of this stuff didn't exist. And if you were going to move out of country, you kind of did have to do it yourself. But these days, not so much. There are distributors that are large and prominent in each of the geographies you want to go after. Be aware you want to prioritize though. Typically you want to make sure you've fully penetrated your local market, because you're going to know it the best. And if you prematurely start going after foreign markets, the distraction could result in failure, as could overcommitment in terms of resources. So it's a case of moving gradually and expanding gradually. There are exceptions. I mean, if you come up with something that looks like everybody and their brother wants, and you better get big fast, or find a partner, or find somebody to sell to, because if you don't, somebody large is going to replicate what it is you've done, and before you get into that market, somebody else will already have established themselves there and be dominant. So there are competitive instances that you have to be aware of. One of the things as a funding entity you should probably have in the government is folks that are focused on the competitive, that are aware of the fact, because you've got to think of it as a child. Mm-hmm. As the funding entity, you're helping raise a child company, and the funder is kind of the nanny, or if you want, or the trainer, or however you want to put it. But if you're lax in any aspect of that company's growth, you're not going to provide the advice and help that company is going to need. And so you do need breadth. And if part of the goal of the funding effort is to move goods out of state, then the skill set surrounding moving those goods out of state needs to be fairly robust. You need to have the relationships, the trust relationships, so the companies aren't taken advantage of. As I mentioned, that's common even for large companies, and an awareness of which geographies would be best and how to prioritize them. Because ideally, you want to go into the most potentially profitable geographies first, and then use the money you're making there to gradually move into other geographies. So it's a gradual build. Otherwise, you really have to watch for. Let me give you an example. I was observing my job is both to consult and often I'm asked to go in and observe and comment on what went on with a failure. And there was a young restaurant supply company that was doing very well in the United States, and they hired an ex-IBM head of sales. Almost always a mistake to hire somebody out of a large company to help you early on in a small company because their proportions of scale are wrong, and that was the case here. He came in and he was missioned to grow this restaurant supply company into a national powerhouse. And what he did is he overstaffed on sales and support. And because he came out of the computing industry and not the restaurant supply industry, by the way, old backstory, IBM actually used to be in the restaurant supply industry back in the early 1900s, but lost that entire market well before the 1930s. So he not only did he overstaff, he staffed wrong with people that didn't understand the industry, and the restaurant failed in a year, just costed right out. And it had been the restaurant supply company ended, and it wasn't because their product wasn't valuable. It's because their expenses got well out of line with revenues, and so it's that stuff. That maturity the funding entity has to be able to overlay on the firm. The younger the firm, the more likely they're going to make avoidable mistakes that experience can prevent. And it's with a light hand helping them not do that that's beneficial. So it's like raising a child. You want to raise the child all the way through to adulthood. And then you also want to assure that adult, because finished companies can fail as well. The Obama administration famously was funding the U.S. Solar energy market. There was a small company in California. They threw a lot of money at it, building unique solar cells, and it was an impressive technology. The yields were much higher at different angles of the sun. It was good, but the problem was China was dumping solar cells into the market below cost, and the administration didn't defend against that dumping, and so the solar company failed spectacularly, lost hundreds of millions of dollars because the U.S. didn't protect the market from dumping, and so the entity, the government entity that's funding, has to have the ability to defend the businesses, at least in the home market, that it's creating. Otherwise, the outcome won't be good. It's like raising your kids but not protecting them from bullies. You've got to carry through all the way. They're your children. You've got to help them be successful, not just at the beginning, but after they're adult. Otherwise, you won't be able to sustain the industry.
Thank you. Professor Edward, one point, because in COVID-19 situation, many women also go unemployed, and they are taking many initiatives, especially they go for startup development and other thing. Even my wife initiative, RM Brand Gallery, she started from 2016. Anyway, so what is your advice for women entrepreneurs? Even, like there are many glass ceiling factors and many challenging factors in Asia for women. So how they can be a better entrepreneurs with their startup initiative in COVID-19 situation. And definitely it's a very big problem for many developing nations. So how they can contribute more on their GDP.
Very, very interesting question. By the way, Rob, I think you were talking about Solyndra.
That's right. I couldn't think of that.
Yeah, Peter Thiel has a discussion of that problem in his book. I think it was about $750 million it lost, something of that nature.
It was close to $1 billion. Yeah, I remember because I watched it happen. It's really, this is not going to end well. They can't. Their prices were well above. Their wholesale prices were well above the retail prices the China crap was charging. So it couldn't sustain.
Yeah. And that's just the reality. So anyway, but on the women thing, this is interesting because, by the way, to add something personal, my wife is a freelance editor, and so she's in the other room right now, taking care of business, as it were, from home. And fortunately, she's able to work at home and doesn't have to go into an office. So I know a little bit about this, but. Again, to offer advice to, and I've got 2 10-year-old daughters, and so hopefully someday they'll become, either be going on an Elon Musk rocket to Mars, or will be entrepreneurs and making a lot of money so I can retire and comfortably.
Mhm.
But seriously, part of the advice I would have for women is it really depends on the level of economic development, what kind of market environment or ecosystem, as you would say, that they are in, and then to look at what sort of services are really needed. I don't know on the ground. That's one of the things about an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur has local knowledge that I don't have, that you don't have, that Rob doesn't have about the local market and what is needed, and possibly what service they can provide. Some of it might just be a really simple service. For example, women. One of the things that we have in this country, of course, is a lot of women provide what we call nanny services, while other women go out and work. And it's not just for rich people. It used to be in the United States, everybody worked. The woman would stay at home and raise the children. And so that was the mix. Today, many, many more women, a bigger percentage of women in the United States and industrialized countries work. And so when they have new children, a lot of times they have to have somebody to come in part-time. So it might just be something as simple as that, to provide some kind of a service of that nature. It could be educational services. In a lot of parts of the less developed world, education services are extremely poor. And so
Mhm.
this is something that that women who have a little bit more learning and so forth can perhaps provide, maybe at a very small cost in local communities. And in a sense, it's babysitting services, as we would say, but it's more important than that. You're raising the next generation. And this goes, by the way, I've looked at some of the situations in Africa and where entrepreneurial women in Africa can provide these kinds of services as well. And again, to look at perhaps uh, uh, even infrastructure services. Again, depending on what level you're talking about, a lot of poorer communities, certainly this would be the case, I think, in Bangladesh, you're going to find a lot of women who have to spend a lot of time, for example, just getting clean water,
Mhm.
because you don't have, in some of these communities, you don't have the kind of filtration plants. Disease is rampant because of infections in the water. And so, for example, maybe groups of local women can figure out a system
Mhm.
to help provide water for the community.
Mhm.
It could be a mix of transport, or, for example, there's a gentleman in the United States, Dean Kamen, who is an inventor, who is a very incredible individual, who's invented a thing called the slingshot. And the slingshot is a sort of small refrigerator size device that can take dirty water and make it into drinkable water. And I know in Africa they're trying to get this device, and you don't even need to plug it in necessarily. You can even use like buffalo dung to power it. And so, for example, I could see a small group of women in Bangladesh, maybe getting some kind of a micro loan, from Mohammed Yunus sort of organization, to be the community provider of clean water. And they'll take
Mhm.
a small percentage, of course, of this. And of course, the clean water is going to free up women who have to walk back and forth to the river. And of course, it's going to mean that they're not going to get as many diseases. Their children are going to be healthy. So there's a whole community benefit there. Think outside of the box. Many people think about providing clean water as well. We need the government to come in and build a big filtration plant. But in a lot of cases, you might think that this can be done by a private entrepreneur doing a startup, and women would be in a particularly good position to do this kind of thing. So there's some very exciting opportunities for women. The other thing I'll
Mhm.
just mention very quickly is I know, again, from my own work, and I'm sure you understand as well, that there are always cultural issues to overcome.
Mhm.
Fortunately, in the West, we've come to the point where we understand women can have careers. Women are not just going to be raising children, though I'm happy that I have a wife who I can raise my children with. Uh, but that's something they also have to overcome. But I think as women provide these kinds of values, then their status is going to be raised in the culture. So I think that there's an advantage even beyond the services that they're providing. A lot of times women have trouble getting into professions and so forth. So anyway, those are some of the thoughts I have about women and how a woman entrepreneur can help out in their communities.
Thank you, thank you. We have our new speakers, Mr. Ben Banerjee. He's an expert on impact investments, and he is doing fantastic work from Switzerland. He's developing summit. He's serving for different startup entrepreneurships, and very interesting work as a policymaker he's doing. Even there, he is also partner of World Talent Economy Forums, and we are actually launching some training program from after the Ramadan in Asia Pacific. So I request our Professor Edward, Professor Rob, those who want to join in this initiative like training and development and consulting, we are very open because there is a huge demand from Asia Pacific. They love to learn. They want to know from the modern world how it works, how they can develop their companies. So Mr. Ben Banerjee, what the concept right now you want to share about impact investment, what's going on inside Europe and your company?
Oh, so I have been busy with this more than 25 years. So that impact investment is basically investment which is good for the environment and or for the society. So we look at the SDGs as a theme. So we train businesses, especially SMEs all around the world, on how to implement SDGs in their business process, or how to create complete business out of SDGs. And we also invest in it. So we have been doing complete end-to-end of implementing SDGs around the world. And yeah, that is mainly where we are focused on. And that's our sector.
Yes, even what we understand from U.S. government, they are moving in Asia Pacific, even the South Asia with their climate change projects. I saw last week, John Kerry also like discussing with different prime minister. Even Biden administrations also discussing with different prime minister in developing nation, especially climate change. I think climate change also you're part of business. So what type of startup?
It is the most important climate change. Yeah. No, sorry,
yes.
Go on.
Yes. What type of startup actually developing inside these climate change issues, or what type of problem you are solving with these things? Yeah.
Climate change is very interesting because that's generally one of the main focus area where we are focused in. And it is not that just President Biden got into it. I think he is the one who initiated the whole meeting. So the meeting took place yesterday. We were very strongly represented there. And so I think he made an extremely strong and powerful commitment to bring down the US carbon emission with 50% by 2030. So let's see how EU muddles through it. But this is creating huge amount of investment, whether it is a sovereign fund, whether it is the lot of sovereign funds, European Investment Bank, all these major financial institutions have put aside huge amount of resources available for climate-related technologies and innovations and investments in that. So, for examples, if you want to know example where we have invested in, one of the major projects in the sector of climate change is renewable energy. That is one of the very big. So whether it is renewable energy in Finland, we have geothermal energy centers, electrical vehicles, we have solar powers, wind powers. So they're all supply-based energy sources, demand-based energy sources. So that is a very, very powerful sector where climate change is second, where we are also very strongly involved with is agri, but that the agriculture society, because agriculture is also a very big source of carbon emission. Transport, supply management. So that is the advantage of climate change, because climate change basically covers a lot of sectors. It touches many, many sectors. It's not only limited to one, so to more sectors. And also now we are investing in how do you call it? Decentralized energy production. So for example, small energy power stations like made from hydroelectric or solar power or wind power, where people can produce this little energy at their own home and they can use it for themselves. And if they have extra, they can put it back on the grid. So there are a lot of these kind of similar projects we are investing in, at this moment. and teaching people. And,
Yeah.
and especially if you look at it, the countries which are economically poor are often the countries which are energy rich. So if I look just within EU, for example, Greece has the capacity to produce enough energy to supply whole of Germany and all the German needs because of its wind and solar power. We have not yet even started to exploit that sector. So there are a lot of things which even within EU we can make a huge difference, because we are still, thanks to our uh, Chancellor Merkel, who is quite addicted to diesel. So, but hopefully we are going to get rid of her soon, and then maybe there is a hope that Germany will start looking more and more into alternative energy sources. So,
Thank you.
That's
Thank you. Yes.
that's.
Yeah. Yes.
I was going to say that's funny because you mentioned what happened yesterday. Something else happened yesterday that is very
Yes.
relevant to climate. Elon Musk, who I just mentioned, launched a manned rocket this morning. Very, very exciting. Also announced a $150 million prize for
Mhm.
for an invention that can take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And this is a private prize, and I listened to his announcement on this yesterday. Now, what's interesting is, as Sharif knows, I'm skeptical about a lot of the problems with global warming. I don't think it's as big a problem as a lot of people mention. And by the way, what's interesting is Elon Musk himself said he's in the middle somewhere. Right now, we have 400 parts per million carbon dioxide. He thinks that if it goes to 600, it's not going to be a big problem. If it goes to 1,000, that could be a big problem. He also said quite correctly that he's concerned about the cure being worse than the problem. So he's looking for solutions that are not going to cause our energy prices to spike. And therefore, Germany has a lot of problems with high energy costs. So you can talk about, yeah. And so what Elon is talking about is a solution that would, for example, pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere that could be used for some industrial or for other purposes. So he's making value out of what is perceived to be a problem. So I call your attention to what Elon is doing, because I think his thinking about the whole issue is very sound. And his solution is, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. Let's not spike our energy prices and destroy our civilization.
Exactly.
Let's do something that takes the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We might have a problem with the new ice age, but we'll worry about that problem when we come to it. But that's a good example of a real entrepreneurial thinking. Now, whether he succeeds or not, I don't know. Who knows?
I completely agree on that point, but I think Sharif didn't mention I'm also in the board of CLC, the Climate Leadership Coalition. So we have been doing research on this carbon absorption from the atmosphere, because we work together with NASA and ESA on that to pinpoint the carbon sectors. The issue with that solution is that it's we did quite a lot, because we worked together with 27 universities. We did a lot of research. It's not so I do agree with Elon Musk in a lot of things, but also a lot of things I don't agree with. And in this, I think I will not, because it's not the land you will require to the amount of land you will require to take the carbon out of the atmosphere is so big that we don't have that land. So it's a very illogical
but the problem is, this is where you have to look at your renewables as well. I did the calculations that if you had the kind of wind farms, we have a big wind farm in Indiana that takes up an area about 3 times the size of the Washington, D.C. And if you were to generate all of the energy needed in the United States, if you got rid of fossil fuels and nuclear, it would take up the land of California, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, and part of Washington State. And I ran the numbers myself. Now, hopefully, we can get those more efficient windmills, but you have serious problems of land use with the renewables as well.
Yes.
That is really that's really an issue. Because we are working, one of our projects we are working is the same. We are working at it more than 5 years, is to take carbon out of the atmosphere. And one of the potential solution is to put the carbon absorption units as near to the carbon production unit as possible. So for example, you have big factories which are spewing CO2 out in the atmosphere. So this absorbing system is as near to it, and preferably, hopefully, even on it,
which is what we
kind
do
of
with coal in this country, which is what we do with
exactly.
clean coal technology in this country.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
Yes,
that makes more sense than just trying to get it out of the atmosphere, like in middle of nowhere.
We
Yes,
agree.
Professor. Yes, Professor Rob. How do you want to add? Because there are some point about climate change related solutions. What your observation?
Well, honestly, if I was, I'd have to be pretty passionate about climate change technology to do a startup there. And the only reason is it's not because I don't care about the climate. The issue is climate change interest tends to change with administrations. So for instance, in my own family's case, the richest portion of my family was the portion that owned the power supply in Arizona. They controlled the power company, and they were very wealthy. And then Jimmy Carter came in, got excited about solar. They made a massive investment in solar. I mean, hawked themselves to the hilt for solar. And then Ronald Reagan came in and killed Jimmy Carter's solar programs, and they lost the power company. And now the richest side of the family is now the poorest side of the family. They're all out working in sales positions and stuff. The no longer running the power company for Arizona. So there is a lot of risk investing in green energy, primarily because administrations just aren't consistent about their support for it. So you kind of have to be at scale. And the other issue is China's been dumping things like solar panels in markets for a while. That makes it very difficult to develop a localized industry in that particular area. Now, the big problem with both solar and wind is storage. Neither one of them will produce 24/7, and batteries just have too much energy loss. You have to overbuild substantially to use batteries. Plus, they wear out. So which is another issue. They're expensive. They're large. They wear out. Lithium ions, nasty stuff. Both to mine and to dispose of.
Cobalt in Africa.
Yeah, a lot of the work's going now into kind of binding solar and wind with hydroelectric. That you pump the water up while it's producing. You use the hydroelectric to generate at night. That seems to be reasonably efficient, but it really is. We're doing low tech, and other folks are using lifting weights. You lift the weight up, the weight comes down, or caves or old mines for water lift. But it just we can't scale it. And then you've got to be wherever that is. You've got transmission issues that you've got to carry to where the energy wants to go. One of the advantages to solar is you can distribute it. A little harder to do with wind because of the placement of the windmills, and as neat as they are, they're not the most quiet things in the world, and they do take out a considerable number of birds, which is kind of problematic. But we have new windmills that don't. So the technology is beginning to evolve to the point where we can do this stuff without killing a major portion of our ecosystem off while we're doing it. But this is not an area for the faint of heart. This is really an area that does require funding, pretty heavy funding and protection from the government because of the whims of this particular market, and it's difficult. And by the way, there's an online meme going on about Musk's $150 million that says something to the effect, well, the person that invented forests, please call Elon Musk. But that's what he's talking about. Forests do just fine, though that takes an awful lot of land. One of the more interesting projects, if you want to read up on it, is the one going on in Greenland, where they're pulling carbon dioxide out of the air and they're pumping it into volcanic rock. And apparently there is a lot of capacity in volcanic rock. Here in Oregon, where I live, we've got a ton of this. I mean, we're all built on it. But part of the issue with regard to carbon extraction is figuring out what you're going to do with the carbon. I think eventually Musk's SpaceX will commission out to shoot the stuff into the sun, but getting rid of that carbon has been problematic. And of course, with global warming, we've got the issue of some of these large ice packs melting, and sadly, they are huge carbon sinks. And so as these things melt, they're releasing huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the air, creating a problem. So it's the heat changes, the weather changes. Whether we're talking about warming or cooling or whatever, clearly the weather is changing in big parts of the world. And it is causing problems of water level increases and these these large carbon releases, and of course the volcanic activity isn't helping at the moment either. So it is a problem we at least need to be set up to deal with, because there have been events in the past history of the world which were just simply volcanic that have created huge problems with regard to the weather over time, and God save us if we take a meteor hit. So we're not well protected. There's an outfit that I belong to called the Lifeboat Foundation, and we spend much of our time thinking about all the wonderful things that are in our future that could wipe out the race. It can be rather depressing, and we're heavily populated with science fiction writers that wax eloquent on why we're not going to be around in a few more years. But but back to the startups. The place to really play if you're doing a startup in the conservation technology area is probably on the installation side as opposed to the R&D and development side. There you can make a pretty good living, and the thing is once you have the installation skills, you can use those installation skills for other things. If they're core installation, building, electrical, whatever, and if for some reason that industry changes, there's a pretty good chance you could pivot with the change. And if not, we're going to be moving to smart homes, smart cities. The skill set can transfer to that as well. Just remember, you're going to need to be agile. But at the end of the day, if a government wants to promote this kind of industry, it needs to support directly and protect it against the whims of the market. Otherwise, it's much riskier than, say, a more staid marketplace like medical technology or some of those things that are just they're going to pretty much consistently be there for the foreseeable future.
Can
Thank
I
you.
react to a couple of points which Rob
Yes,
mentioned?
definitely.
I was just
Definitely.
making notes. Government regulations, you are absolutely correct, because the issue is one of the first project. I think it was my first project which I started. It was this windmill park outside in the water in Amsterdam.
Right.
Just out. It's a very famous project.
Yeah,
But we got. Our issue was that we counted very heavily on the government subsidy at the government which was then. And then a few years later, the government changed, the regulation changed. Long story short. So what we do now is to really advise the startups or the businesses who are into it to make their business plan and their financial calculation as independent of government regulations as possible. Because the mistake we had made then, we were one of the first ones, is that we took the government subsidy in our financial planning. So that made our financial planning profitable. But when the subsidy fell off, the whole plan fell off. So that's why the trick is not to make your financial plan depending on the government subsidy or government support, but to make it as independent as possible. The second problem I wrote down is what you mentioned, the storage battery. That's really a very big issue, but there's a lot of innovation and a lot of development and going on in that. And I think for startups also, that's very important. I mean, you must all be very aware of how much money China is pumping into their universities and educational on this topic, on battery topic.
It's huge there.
Yeah, it's really, so that is, so I think this is a future where they have to work at. Another is supply demand. So when we think about alternative energy, renewable energy, we often think about renewable energy sources, which are supply focused, like wind energy, solar energy. If you have sunny day, you have a lot of energy. You have wind, not sunny day, less. But you also have demand dependent energy sources like the geothermal, or also if you use the hydropower correctly, you can use it as so you take just as much energy as you require when and where. So that's another point. What I also want, where we often do not think about, and it has become a very strong force, is the 38% of our CO2 absorption, or the solution of this taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, comes from nature. Nature is taking 38%, but we don't even put less than 2% of our investments is going into it. We completely are not only forgetting it, we are even destroying it, which is in fact some of the destructions, like in the forests in Amazon, all that, where instead of being a carbon absorber, these forests are becoming carbon emitters.
Sources, yeah.
So we don't. So the solution is already there. We don't have to We just have to protect the solution and help it support it. And if you give little bit of support to the nature recuperate. Nature can take out more CO2 from the atmosphere than we with all our technologies and all our intelligent, brilliant ideas. Whether it is about whales, whether it's about the rainforest, we just have to protect them. They are doing an amazing job. They are doing far better job. And the last point I wanted to mention also on Rob's thing is that we humans, we think everything is gradual. The temperature change will be gradual, the sea water rise will be gradual, everything gradual. And we love these gradual graphs of ours. Right. Unfortunately, nature does not act gradual. Nature sometimes acts, look at the COVID. COVID was an amazing example. It wiped out 4+% of our GDP within a year. Nature works in a really, so if we don't watch out, we do not have, there was this report at WTEF 2 months ago or something, where the scientists came up. If you guys are interested, I can share it to you later on offline. I can send it to you.
Yeah, shoot it over.
That how do you call it? The change will not happen over. So we are not talking about 30 centimeter, 50 centimeter rise in sea level by the end of the century. We can have within 1 week a rise in sea level of 20 to 30 meters. Within 1 week, and it will be unstoppable, and completely we will be able to do nothing about it, because nature does not go in gradual. Nature can make a jump.
What was the water source for that? Was that
from the methane? Once the methane from the, what's it called, the frozen part of Russia, because because nature has these peak levels. It has this. And once the peak runs out, it crashes.
Yeah, well, the thing is that the entire ice flow moves then into the ocean, and that's what gives you almost the instant lift. Yeah, here it was kind of funny. Here in the United States Senate, one of the politicians that was arguing against climate change was pointing out that you put ice in water and the ice melts, the water doesn't go up. And all of us are going, yeah, but the ice isn't in the water. It's on the land right now. It's when it gets into the water. Just you need to drop the ice cube in the glass to show what happened. You can't start with it in the glass because the ice isn't in the water anymore. It's not floating. Yeah, it's sadly our politicians, like most everybody's politicians, aren't exactly science experts, but they think they are.
And I think the tragedy I find in US at this moment, it's my personal opinion, is that climate change has become a kind of a political issue.
It is, and it shouldn't be.
And it shouldn't be. It is completely, it has nothing to do with politics.
Sadly, it has a lot to do with politics, but the fact is we're arguing about something that politics has absolutely no control over. And the underlying argument is regardless of you believe in climate change or not, we need to have control over our environment. And if we don't have control over our environment, whether we're talking about an asteroid hit, global warming, a sun event. I mean, we believe a sun event's what ripped Mars's atmosphere away. We don't have protections against any of this stuff, and every one of them could wipe out humanity. I mean, even our asteroid protection, and we've known about that problem since we believe the dinosaurs died because of one. Is pathetic, and that's kind of a known issue, and we also know we can't track the damn things as well as we need to, so we can't even give ourselves ample warning to call up the miners and shoot them up in rockets to put bombs in them. That was a silly movie. Anyway, but we do need to have control over the environment, because if we don't, then we can't really protect the race, and it's sad that we just don't put a priority on that.
Well, let me find some areas of maybe agreement and disagreement, but mainly agreement. As I say, I think that a lot of the fear of global warming is hyped. However, I want to point out a couple of important points here. First of all, I'm reading two headlines from the NASA website. One is carbon dioxide fertilization greening Earth study finds. That was 2016, and then the other one from a year or two ago, global green up, slowing warming. So I do agree that as carbon dioxide goes in the atmosphere and we get a lot more crop production and things like that, this is actually part of the cycle that's at least there's some benefits coming there. But the other thing I want to mention is we're talking about energy, whether or not you're concerned about global warming or not. I think it is important for entrepreneurs to look for the best less costly sources of energy. Now, by the way, yesterday, because I was thinking of Elon Musk, I looked again at how much it would cost to put solar panels on the roof of my house. And unfortunately, Elon's battery right now, the wall costs $7,000 or so. And so I decided at this point, I can't afford
it. Was.
Elon, pardon?
It's cheaper than it was. It started off at 10 grand.
Yeah, it's cheaper now. But the point is that I would be more than pleased to have I don't care whether it's a greenhouse, but I would be pleased to have a house where I have cheaper energy. And so to the extent that someone like a Musk or, whoever it is can provide that, I think this would be a good thing in and of itself. And again, if you are a entrepreneur in Germany and you're looking at your electricity costs tripling, or in some of the American states, you're probably going to have some problems, or you might have to move somewhere else. So I do think that this discussion of energy is an important discussion. And one of the things I think I mentioned in the previous broadcast is I was excited in 2016 when I was flying from California back to the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm flying over Nevada, and I see this tower, and it looks like it's a big tower with mirrors surrounding it, and the mirrors are all shooting the heat up to the top of the tower. And I thought, wow, this is interesting, taking advantage of the heat in the Nevada desert to produce energy. And when I got back, I read about the project and what it was doing, because the battery issue is a very serious issue, as you pointed out, was trying to store the energy that is, or the heat that's produced during the day in molten salt. So that then during the night when the sun isn't shining, you can simply convert that energy. And I thought this is the Crescent Hills, I think, was the project. And I thought, wow, this is really innovative. I really like this. And then unfortunately, about a year or so ago, they had to pull the plug on the project because, again, it was just not economically viable. So there was it was a great example. And I was thinking, wow, this is cool. This can provide cheap energy for everyone. Nevada can take advantage of the fact that it's a very hot state. Now, anyway, so I am very excited about alternative energy if it's cheaper, just as I'm excited about alternative anything if it's
yeah. Okay.
Well,
thank you.
A lot of the stuff that goes on with regard to global warming falls into the category of things we should do anyway. The getting rid of petrochemicals, we should just do that anyway. It's the damage that's done while mining it, the damage that's done to the environment when using it are just horrible things. The plastics in and of themselves are a nightmare, especially ocean-borne plastics. And one of the scary things going on right now is the petrochemical industry is talking, as we move to electric cars, about going Uber on plastics instead of producing gas, which is not exactly the outcome I think people anticipated. We're just trading one pollutant for another. And given the fact that we're now eating a lot of plastics and those plastics are carcinogens, that would be problematic. But that does open up business opportunities. Cleaning up the plastics has turned out to be a pretty decent business opportunity for a number of folks in remote areas, coming up with economic ways, safe ways, ways other than burning the stuff, which is a different kind of problem, to eliminate this stuff. I'm still thinking that one of the uses of those big SpaceX rockets, okay, let's just shoot the plastics into the sun. We don't have to worry about it anymore. We do have heavy lift costs, but the fact is a lot of the stuff they're going to go. You take global warming out of it and just say we ought to do this just for people's health anyway. You solve the problem and you get out of the controversy.
Yeah. Hey, Rob, your idea about shooting into the sun, I actually wrote something several decades ago when I was doing space policy. Yeah. But my idea was nuclear energy is still clean and safe. And so I thought, look, why all this concern about nuclear energy? We're not going to have Chernobyls because that was an old, communist Soviet mess. But why not increase the use of nuclear? And if you're really concerned about whether we should bury the waste in the desert, which I still think is a good idea, then fine. When someone like a Musk or a Jeff Bezos brings costs down, you just shoot it up into space and
you don't worry about it anymore. Yeah, it's a heavy lift. Well, the thing is nuclear energy. It depends. Nuclear energy is all relative. It's a lot cleaner than petrochemical energy or even natural gas, but you do still have a disposal problem. In the UK, just you mentioned this, just yesterday they popped up, and the nuclear storage facility in the UK, which has thousands. Basically, they've taken these things and putting them in a big lake, man-made lake with thousands of gallons of water, and it's getting full, and they have no idea what to do with the water. birds are landing in this water, swimming around in it, and then taking off. And so they've now got hired groups of people with guns to shoot the birds, and then they've got to bury the birds as hazardous waste. We're talking old school here. So nuclear energy still has disposal issues. You point out, it just relative to what we're using now. It's a lot cleaner. I think right now the industry.
So the windmill blades.
Yeah, that's funny too. Is that and they're now coming up with different windmill blade configurations that are more disposable. But yeah, the big carbon fiber blades. They don't break down very easily in the landfills either.
And
it's a kind of nature I'm thinking about, but it's still a smaller problem than the waste that's developed from say an oil or coal fired plant. So it's all relative. It just if you can move to a cleaner technology. Geothermal right now looks to be the cleanest. 24/7 production and plenty of source. And of course, we'll probably find out if you watch some of the old sci-fi movies that they do a big geothermal plant and suddenly the Earth's going to blow up. Which is silly, but it's just kind of, sometimes it just kind of seems like that's our luck. We find something that's really great, new, and then discover that all the things we didn't think about are kind of problems. Well, that's the nature of progress.
Yeah, let's not watch so many science fiction movies. Remember, it's science fiction.
Yes. Yeah. Mr. Ben, thank you. It's really great discussions, and we will do a lot more discussion. Even 29th and 30th of May, we have our summit. We are developing our university already. We are discussing with our government that how we can develop our new universities. Definitely Professor Edward, Professor Rob, as well as Mr. Ben Banerjee will be part of these things. We need impact investment for our university. Hopefully, Mr. Ben and his organization will support our initiative. We want to develop one of the best universities in South Asia. So already with the Prime Minister Office, University Grant Commissions, and the Education Ministry, we are discussing how we can, and some of the largest universities from Asia Pacific, we are collaborating. So hopefully it will be a very interesting journey, and we can do a meaningful contribution, because what we are discussing, we need to do real life change. University education is the way that we can change, as well as when we develop an educated group of people, they can develop many startups and they can solve many problems in their ecosystem. That is our objective. So we want more industrial affiliation, and we are open for that. Those who want to collaborate with World Talent Economy Forum, we are open for that. So we directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today. I want to start from Mr. Ben, then Professor Edward, and finally Professor Rob.
Oh, I'll just couple of comments I again wrote down while Rob and Edward were speaking.
Yes.
The plastic is a very good idea, because we have already invested in a couple of businesses who are taking plastic out of the ocean or out of the environment, and they're making houses out of it, very cheap and good houses, or road. So it is being done. Space, I'm not very supportive of that, because I think we have filled the space with so much crap already that it has become dangerous for our satellites and our other space missions. So I would prefer to cut it at the source and have less crap than send it out in the space.
We were mostly just kidding.
Okay. No, you never know who is listening, and they think it's a brilliant idea. Then another is this, there's an issue with as the population grows and as the economy grows, our energy demand grows. So this is linked together. And as the energy demand grows, the CO2 emission grows. But we have to find out, and that is where the startups and the businesses should work at, is to find out a way that it breaks, that your economy and energy can grow, but your CO2 emission does not grow. And apparently 2 countries have already managed to do this, break this connection. That is Finland and UK. They have already broken that link, that your energy requirement or your energy production can keep on growing, but that does not go at the cost of CO2 emission. CO2 emission is going down. And the last, what I wrote was geothermal. We have already done a project in Finland. That's a massively successful project and very big. If you guys have time, you can check it out. It's in Espoo. It's a little city north of Helsinki. And they are drilling. They're 6 kilometers down, and they are taking. It has a very solid bottom, so there is no chance of earthquakes or some kind of film idea of a film in the future. So what they're doing is, in the winter, they're taking out the heat out from the core and using it, and it warms up the complete 1/4 of the city. And in the summer, they're doing exactly the opposite. They're pumping hot in. So the stones or the layers of the ground which has lost the heat because it has been taken out, in the summer it is pumped back. So you always have this energy circle going around. So I think that's where I'll finish for today.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Edward.
Okay, just a few closing comments here. Interesting, since Elon Musk seems to have been part of our discussion today, I'll mention something else that he mentioned yesterday, which I actually agree with. He said, in terms of existential problems in the future, he didn't put global warming at the top. He put it's on his list, but he said that the second biggest problem is population collapse. And I agree with that. I looked at, if you take a look back at the 1960s and you see Paul Ehrlich talking about how if we grow from 3 billion people to 4 or 5 billion people, there are going to be hundreds of thousands of bodies in the streets. All of those predictions about overpopulation turned out to be completely wrong. Now, there are other issues you can talk about with overpopulation or so-called overpopulation, but I wouldn't worry about population growth destroying the environment, because as birth rates go, as medical technology increases, as fewer people are dying from disease, they don't have 8 kids in a family to make sure they can have 2 survive. They have fewer kids. And you see this happening in all developed countries. Every country that develops, you see the population level off or even start going down, as in Japan and some of these other countries. I think you can see that in places like Malaysia and maybe ultimately India and China. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking, we know what the birth rate is today. So we know what the population is going to be in, a couple of decades to come. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're really looking in the long term, assume that this is something you may have labor shortages. So I think that's interesting. But the other thing is to come back to the topic of this discussion today, and that is startups and investment. I would simply say, be entrepreneurial. Take a look at Peter Thiel's book and some of the very good work that has been done that can help you as a startup and looking for investors to think about where you can find a market niche, about where you can avoid just being one of so many companies trying to get a small part of a huge market, like say in the case of green technology that Thiel discusses. Avoid those kinds of mistakes. Avoid the mistakes that Rob has correctly pointed out about understanding that you need certain kinds of people at the beginning of a company. You need certain kinds of investors at the beginning of a new company. And then as the company starts to grow, you're going to have to get a different mix of people and so forth. Understanding how business works and how you can grow a business really is going to be crucial. I think Rob's points on this were quite correct. Rob, take it away.
Yes.
Sure. So on entrepreneurs, if you're a government setting up a program to help entrepreneurs, just recognize the money is the minor part. The major part is providing skills, assistance, mentoring, and making sure you've got the capability of sustaining the startup all the way through its full set of cycles, from birth to grave, and assuring that grave doesn't come prematurely. That's the goal. This isn't about, hey, tossing money over a wall and hoping it magically grows into a beanstalk. It really is about husbanding the effort forward. I didn't get a chance to talk about women in startups. Edward pointed out something that is really important here. There's no issue. Women can do anything in terms of running a company or operating, can often do things like management, particularly in the mid to higher tiers, better than men can. But the problem is, if you've got a culture that is counter to women running things, it's going to create a lot of headroom, and so that's where the government and the funding source can provide protection, provide oversight, make sure these women-run businesses are not abused or bullied. It unfortunately is a fact of life, which means a woman-run business needs to be a bit more robust than a male-run business in those cultures. And wonderful as we like to think of ourselves in the United States, we have huge problems here with regard to just too few women CEOs and a lack of diversity in the C rank of executives. But it is important to have diversity. You end up with better products. You end up with a better diversity of skills in the company, which can lend itself to better growth. But you cannot ignore the cultural issues. You've got to make sure you can weather those storms and you have protections in place to overcome them if possible. A lot of times with women-run businesses, it may be better actually to build the business in a different geography, depending on the cultural issues that you have. It's unfortunate, but you have to deal with reality. In the end, doing a startup, I've done 3 startups myself. They can be a ton of fun. But just recognize most fail. But the experience that you get is incredibly beneficial. The skills. So I think everybody sometime in their career, if they're good self-starters, and that's it. If you don't do a startup, if you need management oversight, but if you're a strong self-starter, you get excited. You like working in small teams. You'll make friends that will last a lifetime. You'll have a lot of fun, and as long as you focus on the fun and doing what you're doing and not trying to get rich overnight, not only will you do have a better chance of survival, but regardless of what happens, your time is well spent. I do caution one thing: a lot of startups hire people at zero salary at the front end with the idea that you're going to make money at the back end. That almost never happens. In fact, I had a friend of mine that did that, and right at the time the company started making money and could have paid him, they laid him off and brought in somebody else to do his job, which was just a tad disappointing. So just do recognize that doing volunteer labor is kind of interesting, but you do want to make sure that if the company transitions, that actually works out to something, and also that you can afford to work without a salary for a period of time. A lot of folks can't. So play heads up ball. Startups aren't for everybody. In fact, I would say a minority of people should be doing startups. One final comment: if at all possible, build your skills working for a company, then do the startup, not the other way around, because what you don't know can wipe you out. And if you're picking a funding source, pick a funding source that can also provide you the advice you need to be successful, not just money. That's it.
Thank you. It's really great session, and we are observing from our community. They are sharing our content. They really like your sessions, how you contributing for a startup, especially for investment, and they get a real guideline from the industry. So thank you, Professor Rob, Professor Edward, for your continuous support for all World Talent Economy Forum. So hopefully we will make a better world together. Thank you for joining today. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.